Welcome back to another episode of Poly Talks, and today we'll be discussing a potent matter, which is the issue of how the United States, specifically Congress and the federal government, in addition to state and local governments, can achieve the United States' goal of reducing carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, and in fact becoming a carbon neutral country by 2050. Now, both of these are very ambitious goals. However, one major bolster that helped the United States achieve these goals, or will help the United States, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed later last year under President Biden. And in fact, may I remind you, the extremely thin margins in the United States Congress. And that was significant, or Democratic majorities, because as we will discuss later, Republicans, for whatever reason, are practically unanimously opposed to climate change action, with few exceptions. But either way, this bill has been estimated by various sources to potentially decrease greenhouse emissions by 32 to 42%, or other emissions are 37% to 41%, according to various research groups. And this is obviously not the entire 50% goal, and this is all compared to 2005, although it would still make a substantial difference, and it means that it's much easier now for state governments to close that gap, and it puts into real possibility the United States achieving the goal outlined by Joe Biden in his ambitious plans to reduce greenhouse gases. So, of course, that is a major bolster, but it's not the full story. And it's clear that this is certainly not the end. One piece of federal legislation, although extremely significant, is not a substitute for the vast effort and kind of reversion of our current state of the world that will be necessary in order to reach a stable state and prevent further catastrophic global warming. But now I will discuss that while climate change is not necessarily a political or partisan issue, it certainly is becoming one rapidly and has become one. And one implication of that is Republicans actually are strongly opposed to most climate change action on the whole, and these reasons mainly constitute kind of their downplaying of the climate crisis, and that there is not much urgency, and then also that it would be harmful on an economic level. So what that means is, as long as Republicans are in power in Congress, the presidency, and frankly even the Supreme Court, it makes getting climate action passed a lot more difficult, to the point of impossibility. And that's what I'll be discussing today, about why Democrats need to win both the House, the Senate, and the presidency in 2024 to achieve any kind of meaningful action on climate change. Now, that sounds like a massive undertaking, and that's because it is. To achieve even one of these chambers would be a great achievement for Democrats, and all three would be basically a miracle at this point, especially with their very poor Senate map, although it's certainly not impossible if what we've seen in recent years is anything to go off of. Democrats have been having great results recently, so you never know if that trend might continue. But anyways, the point of that is all to say that this next election cycle will be a pivotal moment, as always, for climate action. And what that means is Democrats will really want to focus on winning a majority of electoral votes, and obviously presidential election will be the main focus, and I will actually be releasing a video later on a hypothetical presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And this is one of the many fascinating scenarios we may see, depending on who the Republican nominee for president is, of course. But in this scenario, let's just say that Democrats win, and I will go ahead and... Or actually, we do not need to characterize that. Let's just say that Democrats win this election. Great. They've done that. They've done one of the hard parts, and that still gives them a lot of leverage with executive orders and certainly veto power, but they still need to win both the Senate and the House. So I've gone over the Senate before, and this will be an extremely tough undertaking for Democrats. They'll need to win 2 of the 3 of either Montana, Ohio, or West Virginia, and in addition to retaining all their other states, and that's assuming that Democrats don't pick up any Republican seats, which I think at this point is very unlikely. So, in that scenario, Democrats would have a very tough time regaining Senate control, although it is certainly not impossible, or winning Senate control. And, of course, assuming the president is a Democrat, then they can win 50, so that's what that earlier scenario was based off of. So let's say they achieve that, then their final obstacle, or technically the Senate is their final obstacle, that is the most difficult out of the 3 in my opinion, but the House is another obstacle, and they will need to win a majority in this chamber as well, recapture it from Republicans, and gain a federal government trifecta. Now, I think the odds of all this of happening are extremely unlikely, and that just goes to show that this is such a fragile political environment, where essentially what we have and what we've been having recently are long periods of inactivity in Congress, followed by a government trifecta, which is like the only true time when true legislative action can take place. And increasingly recently, periods of divided government have simply been characterized by fighting and gridlock, and certainly not any kind of meaningful climate action. So, long story short, essentially Democrats will be certainly competing in this election in large part because it makes a massive difference for the environment and will have major ramifications for their future prospects and their hopes of cutting down greenhouse emissions to 50%, or by 50%, I should say, compared to 2005 levels by 2030. But what I will say is, while this may be the hope for Democrats, I do find it exceedingly unlikely, and that is the unfortunate reality Democrats must face, and not necessarily because of their own factors, their own problems, but simply due to many of the United States electoral quirks. They are certainly facing a very difficult position in 2024, and I don't expect that to change, barring any drastic events. So, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Polytalks. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you quite soon.